Okay, so I think we've got most people joining, or I'll just do the housekeeping at the moment to let a few more people join. So thank you for joining the workshop today on using data to add value to your business. We're obviously expecting a lot of social businesses, social enterprises and charities involved in the call today. So we've got Fraser Nicol and Mitchell Collins, who I will introduce in a little while from Scott Moncrieff. So it's great to have Scott Moncrieff with us. They've been with us for the whole week of webinars so far. They incidentally are our charity auditors, so thanks to them for doing all of that. But it was hugely interesting to me that the organisation also has a function where you can look at data, ID, IT, customer insights, all that sort of thing, and that you're willing to share it with us today. So that's fantastic. I'll then, after both of your section, I'll go on to two social enterprises that we work really close with at the moment, which I think are brilliant and have huge potential. So we've got Lorna Paul from Giraffe Healthcare, and we've also got Jude Phillips from Grow Communication, both organisations who have either used data prior to COVID or have realised more opportunities with data through COVID, and are changing their strategies perhaps to understand their customers and understand that data a little bit better. Anyway, I'll stop waffling and I'll pass over to Fraser and to Mitchell. I'll get your slides as I'm speaking, and if you can just maybe just introduce yourselves and the organisation that you come from.
Hi, thanks a lot, Kieran. So my name's Fraser Nicol, and I'm the partner in charge of a group called Business Technology Consulting, which, as Kieran said, is part of Scott Moncrieff. I've spent about 20 years helping organizations get the most out of their technology. Probably for the last 11 or so years of that, I've become increasingly more and more involved with data. I wouldn't describe myself as a data scientist by trade or background, but I've run a lot of data analytics assignments for various companies I've worked for, and particularly of late for Scott Moncrieff. And I've run assignments, everything from, well, back in 2008, helping an energy company move its trading arm out of the UK into Germany, and therefore helping them recalculate all their energy trades using data analytics, which was very complicated, to in the public sector working with one of the big ministries down in London, and they wanted to know if one of their third-party providers, one of the big, the big third-party providers that do a lot of the actual work for the ministries, was performing against a contract. So we were looking at how they were moving prisoners around the country and were they hitting their KPIs and re-performing those KPIs to prove that they were actually doing as well as they said they were. But we've also worked a lot with much smaller organizations, and today we're going to take you guys through some examples of how data analytics can work in the third sector, but for small organizations in particular, to try to help you understand how you could use data a bit more. But I'll hold fire there. I don't want to steal too much of our thunder, so I'll just let Mitch introduce himself as well.
Yeah, perfect. Hi everyone, my name's Mitch. Just as a little disclaimer, I've got a one-year-old boy next door, so he's just gone down for his nap. So in case you hear any screaming, it's nothing to be worried about. So yeah, so as Fraser said, I work with him in the business technology consulting team, and I help run the data analytics practice. Well, I'd say my interest in data started at university. So sort of as my dissertation came in, what I did was I helped develop measures to better understand the economics of child well-being. And what that was it involved taking a lot of socioeconomic statistics and then trying to provide more insight in child well-being in Scotland. Taking that to my career, so in my career I've worked the various different technology aspects of accountancy, and I've basically taken that sort of interest in data. What I've found, like, to me, it was a case of taking like a surfing analogy with data. It felt as if it was a wave that was building up and up and up, and I was like, I wanted to be able to catch that wave. I wanted to be able to get closer to it. So I've always felt like I was numerical and numerically literate, but it was just a case of me wanting to move across working into data and being able to help clients work in data and just be able to jump onto that wave as it carries in. So that's a little introduction about myself.
Well, that's a fantastic analogy.
Kieran, I can't see any slides yet.
I will share them with the
Oh, great. Okay.
audience right now.
Cool. I've not used Zoom for a while for a webinar, so I wasn't sure if you're going to see them.
No, yeah, fantastic. So I'll do it from the beginning. Excellent. And you can tell me to skip on.
Okay. Well, this appears to be a presentation about redundancy.
Oh, excuse me.
Which,
yeah, that's not the.
Hopefully, we're going to have a slightly more positive message today about
that's
data.
Not your brief. That's not your brief today. Apologies. So that I was just testing people to see if everyone's alert. So that's great. Fantastic.
Well, while Kieran's doing that, I'll just say a little bit about the team we work for. So we cover cybersecurity, privacy, IT audit, and digital transformation. And Mitch's group, the data analytics group, really underpins all of that. So as well as doing that range of services and doing data analytics for our clients, we also use data ourselves. So we've been using data within our own company to look at how do we improve our auditing. So we use data analytics to kind of extract all the data that previously auditors might have sample checked and do much more extensive procedures on that. We use it for developing dashboards, and we also use it to help our clients improve their own processes. So I was on a call this morning. I'm going to talk a bit more about that later with a client that was looking at kind of how do they use data to enhance their cybersecurity reporting. So that hopefully gets us a little bit ahead in the presentation, Kieran, when you manage to bring it up. Looks like.
That's fantastic. Sorry, that's fantastic. That's can you see the screen being shared at the moment?
Yeah, but it's still the previous presentation.
Oh, so I'm sorry.
You might need to change the window that you're sharing.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm doing. Yeah. Apologies, it's been a while since I've. Yeah, great. So I've got this one here. Sorry, I was looking at the other screen. Great.
Okay, let's move forward through a few slides. And why don't you move to what will we cover, or what we will cover, which is slide 4. So I think we've done that. Yep. No, back. That's it.
Oops, sorry.
Nope.
What we covered. Great.
Okay. So I'm going to hand over to Mitch here. Hopefully you can see that, Mitch.
And, brilliant. So yeah, we're going to be looking at 3 different areas. So in terms of data value, a bit more practical in terms of getting started, and then opening up for any questions. So if we just touch on data value to start off with, I guess one of the more common terms you hear surrounding data value is that data value is the new oil. And I know Fraser hates using that phrase. It's one of those little, pet hates. But I think that metaphor has arisen through companies such as Google or Amazon, Facebook, being able to monetize the data that they hold. What we're going to do is just discuss some other ways in which you can sort of obtain value from the data that you're currently holding. And then once we do that, we'll go on to the how you get started. We're all on our own data journeys, and so we're not necessarily all going to be the Googles or the Amazons of the world. And it might seem daunting or potentially hard to relate to when we hear about what they do with data. Instead, what we're going to look at is sharing a sort of basic maturity model, which we can use to understand where we're at on our data journey, and how we can then get started and start investing into data. But before we share our stories and our experiences and the sort of maturity model, we thought it'd be really helpful to get you to start thinking about where you're at with your data journey. And so we've got a couple of questions which Fraser will lead into. And I guess the purpose of that is just to get you thinking about your own organizations, and be prepared when we introduce the data maturity model, just so that you sort of pre-thought about it when that comes up.
Yeah, and maybe some of you have heard the analogy data is the new oil. As it comes back, people use it because it's data is valuable, and that's the point they're trying to get across, and oil is valuable. But data is not oil. There there are lots of differences between data and oil. And one is that there's an awful lot of data around and that it's growing all the time. And I think that's a really important thing to understand about data, is that the reason we're all talking about it is because there's been a shift in the way that we as a society interact with each other and capture information about each other and digitize that information. And those touching every single day. And therefore the data is growing. And therefore, unlike oil, which is a declining resource, data is kind of an exponentially increasing resource. And also, unlike oil, well, I suppose like oil to a certain extent, but unlike oil in general, it could be used in lots of different ways. So the way one company or organization would use data, or the same data set, might be completely different to the way another organization uses it. It's also not immediately obvious how to use data. And I think that's kind of what we're trying to tackle today, is trying to help organizations get their heads around what can you do with data, what can you get out of the data you've got. So I think the oil analogy is useful maybe to start a conversation, and it was useful actually for me this morning when I heard Mitch use that when we were rehearsing, and it got me thinking about, well, why do I hate this analogy so much, and what are the differences? And so it's useful to kind of use analogy sometimes, but I think it's important to recognize those differences. So we've got a question that we want you to consider as we go through this presentation, and if only to help kind of prompt a bit of a discussion afterwards. And we're going to leave a little bit of time. We've actually cut this presentation down from a whole day long session that we run for boards and teams of executives to help them understand how to use data. So it's the first time we've ever tried to do it in half an hour before, so we might overrun slightly, but I'm going to try to leave at least 10 minutes at the end for a bit of a conversation. But Kieran, if you could just move us through the next slide, we'll see two questions. The first question is, what do you think is your organization's biggest strength with regards to data? You know, it could just be the quantity of data you've got. It could be something you're already doing. That would be really helpful to share with everybody else here. And I'd be really interested to hear about that. But what would you think is your biggest strength? And secondly, and conversely, where do you think you could be doing better? And I guess probably everyone on this call can answer that question, because I assume that that's maybe one of the reasons you've joined this call, is to kind of feel you feel somehow that you could be doing a bit more with data. So what is it that's triggered that? You know, where do you really want to see some kind of improvement? And if you could kind of just put your questions in the chat, and then Kieran can pick them up through the. We won't answer them as we go, but we'll hopefully get a chance to answer a few of them at the end. So could we move on to the next slide, please? So data value. So I alluded earlier in my spiel about oil. That data is increasing and it's changing as well. So 10 years ago, data was probably used a lot by the financial services sector, the banks, and by retailers, so organizations like Amazon. And what they would do, you know, they'd be capturing purchase information and maybe little else besides that. Nowadays, you're capturing purchase, you know, what's being bought. You're capturing the identity of who's bought it. You might be capturing physiological data about that person when they bought it. You might be capturing where they were when they bought it. You might even be capturing the feedback they have on that indication, the feedback they have on the data or on the thing that they bought straight away. If they've posted about it on social media, your CRM might be able to pick that up. So many organizations are gathering a lot more data than they were before, but the question is, how do we get value from that? So we've tried to boil this down into 3 categories, and Mitch is going to talk through each of them and give a bit of an example to each. The first one, if we could go to the next slide.
Sure. So
that's okay. The first one is enhanced decision making. How do you make better decisions with data? And this is probably the easiest one to do. So that's where we're going to start. And this could be questions like, you know, who are the most engaged customer group or service user group? Who are the most disengaged? What can we provide some kind of prompts or warnings to people before they make decisions? You know, there are lots of different opportunities to use data to improve your organization's decision making. And I'll just hand it over to Mitch now to give an example.
Yeah, brilliant. So for each of these, basically, Fraser's going to introduce them, and I'm just going to share a story. I think it's easier just to be able to relate to stories and see how they fit into your own organizations. So on the enhanced decision making, there's a situation where we were working with a small but growing social enterprise. that was looking to expand production and sort of increase sales, increase their outreach. The client had a retail and a wholesale part of their business and wasn't sure really how to expand. I guess the trigger is sort of why data, why are we using data, and what was the question that we were trying to solve. So our client contact was really analytical, and he was sort of that analytical person. He had his hunches about how and where to expand production and how to expand the social enterprise, but he really wanted that to be backed up by data and backed up by that sort of information, his decision-making process. So the questions they came to us trying to answer is, I guess, should we expand? If so, should that be retail? Should that be wholesale? And if so, where? So I guess that's where we came into this process. In terms of the work that we did something called exploratory data analysis, which is a technical term just meaning we played around with some statistics and then looked at some charts and some visualizations just to be able to get an understanding and a sense of the data. The data that they provided was sales data and production data. It was really nothing complicated. It was just an extract from the accounting package and a spreadsheet. What we were able to then do is use the data that provided to us and then combine it with open source data and overlay that onto a map showing all the potential customers, and then combining it with socioeconomic data to sort of understand the hotspots of activity or potential economic activity in the area and how those could map up with their existing customers and then potential future customers. So we were just able to take that sort of initial sales data they had and just use data that's freely available from the Scottish Government to sort of provide more insight. The results of our analysis meant that we provided more understanding about the wholesale side of the business and the implications of potential new retail sites on the wholesale side of the business. But it also sort of raised more questions about locations, trying to deliver to existing customers, and how to keep logistics and delivery costs sort of under control. It also prompted further conversations about what types of customers they should be targeting and how they could potentially impact, how that could potentially impact their product offering. So we were able to provide all of that insight basically to our client, who was then able to take it to the board. And what it meant is that when they came to making their decisions, it was backed up with a whole lot more information than it might have been otherwise or previously, rather than just that sort of hunch or that sort of qualitative analysis. It sort of provided the data that could back up that decision to provide this enhanced decision making.
And so as Mitch sort of indicates there, enhanced decision making quite often leads into the next area we're going to talk about, which is improving operations. And I think this is one of the most important areas for many organizations, because while you can, enhanced decision making is relatively easy to do, quick to do, and can yield very quick and noticeable results, particularly in marketing and customer engagement and customer insight. Improving your operations is a much more sustainable, leads to much more sustainable benefits, because obviously you're hopefully becoming more efficient, or reducing risk, or generating more profit per transaction through those improvements. And also to our customers that aren't charities, it's very attractive because your competitors can't see how your operations are improving on the inside, and therefore it can give you a competitive advantage, because they can see sort of new marketing campaigns and new ways that you might be interacting with the outside world. Internal improvements are a lot harder to copy. So improving operations, I think, is a really important one to look at. And Mitch has already alluded to kind of how the piece of work he did started management thinking along those lines. But Mitch, if you want to give another example there as well.
Yeah, sounds good. So I guess I've got another story with this part of the value from data. For this one, we worked with an organization that handles complaints, and that's sort of core part of their business or operational model. Our client wanted to be able to better understand what complaints they were spending the most time on, and whether they could improve processes to make them more efficient. They were also interested in predicting which cases they would take and they could resolve quickly, and which ones would be dragging out and taking much longer, and therefore weren't necessarily worth spending their time and effort on. Again, the bringing it back to the sort of why data, the client was collecting all of this data through their complaint management tool, but they were potentially just doing some reporting or they were just extracting it out and not really doing much with it. They had all this data they were collecting on a routine basis, but they really wanted to get some more insight and more understanding from it. So they came to us and asked, how are our processes operating against how we think they're operating? And is there any way we could potentially improve it? So what we did was something we call a data discovery exercise. And so what that means is we took a sample of the data and we basically were given some sort of exam type questions or some questions that management had to say, could you try and answer these hypotheses, or could you try and answer these potential questions that we might have with this data? Where the discovery bit comes in is that we work hard to try and understand the organization, understand the business, and then try and relate our thinking back into that. But it's a very iterative process. We don't spend 2 weeks away in a black hole and or in a dark room and come back and say, we've solved all your problems. We probe and we ask some questions, we come back with some results, and then we get given some more questions, and we try and come back with some more responses. And so that collaborative working with each other approach is the best way to work together, we find. I guess the results from our work was that actually they were able to alter their processes, their resources, and also their key reporting to external stakeholders. What the analysis showed was that it provided them with insight in terms of how the different complaint types impacted their workloads, which then impacted the time and effort taken to resolve each type of complaint. This then provided them with information in terms of what's our most profitable complaint type and which types are most complicated and which ones do we need to spend the most time and effort on. It enabled them to sort of understand that more profitability of the complaint resolutions. And it then impacted the process to determine, okay, well, are we getting enough information about that complaint type at the start? And how do we ensure that we're able to allocate the appropriate amount of resources to each complaint type as it comes in? So it enabled them to basically change the way that they were looking at the different complaint types.
Thanks, Mitch. And so the final one we're going to talk about is automating processes, which is probably the more time-consuming and complex aspect of this we're going to talk about, but not necessarily something that a small organization can't or shouldn't do. And I guess some of you might be thinking, oh, process automation, artificial intelligence, that's kind of a bit beyond where we are, and maybe it is. But for example, this morning I was talking to a housing group, and we were talking about cybersecurity. We weren't actually talking about data analytics, but they were telling me about how they're logging all the security incidents that they have. And they have well, not necessarily obviously, but they have firewall incidents. They have issues with people on their desktops. They have issues with their servers, and all of these are being monitored by a different monitoring tool, which generates quite an extensive log. And every morning, their security engineers have to come in and manually kind of review that log and see, is there any kind of security incident they need to worry about? And what they're doing is they're purchasing a tool that will sit above all this, extract all this data into one simple reporting mechanism, and then allow them to see, based on them defining, based on their own infrastructure and the threats that they're interested in responding to, their own kind of reporting, so that they can have sort of tailored reports that cover all their different kinds of IT, and allow them just to see in one place the things they really need to focus on. And that's just a very good but very simple example of how you can overlay analytics to automate a process, and also how you can take a lot of the pain out of a process to make it a simpler process, and one that maybe a more junior member of staff can do. Or in this case, what they're then going to do is outsource this to a third party to do their security monitoring for them. But obviously, once you've made a process simple, it's cheaper to outsource than outsourcing a complicated process. So that's just one example I'm aware of from as recently as a call I was on, 10 o'clock this morning. But I think, Mitch, you've got a quick one you want to share with us as well.
Yeah, I guess the third example, third story was around employee expenses. So a client was looking to then basically put in a self-approval expenses process. But what that meant was that previously it was line managers would sign off and authorize those expenses. And now they were then looking to rely on data to be able to validate whether these expenses were valid or not. So they came to us and asked, given the change in process, could they help us identify Could we help them identify whether the employee expenses were appropriate or usual or unusual? So what we're able to do for them was automate the process by producing a series of scripts that would produce a series of tests on the data that could identify whether a transaction or an expense was unusual or not unusual. And what we're able to do for them was present that in a dashboard, so that management could then go in, take all of this data that they're producing and have something interactive, and then start asking questions of whether something was usual or unusual or not. The benefit for the client is that rather than having to go through each individual expense item and potentially approve it or not approve it, they were able to then save a lot of time and effort, and be able to monitor expenses on an overall level at a weekly or monthly basis. So they were able to gain much more assurance over their process by sort of adding this verification tool that we did into that process.
Great, thanks, Rich. So if we could have the next slide. So we're going to talk a bit about how do you do this. So what we've tried to do in the first bit of this presentation is try to give you some indications of what you could do and some examples. And now we just want to give you a sort of a sample of how to get started. So first of all, if we go to the next slide, I'll talk, next slide, please. So first of all, I'll talk very quickly through this model. So Mitch, I'll talk through this model, and then in the interest of time, if you just go straight in, we'll just go straight into the next slide with you doing that one. Mitch was going to give a few more examples on this slide, but I think in the, I'm just checking our watch. I want to make sure we've got time for questions. So we'll keep this slide fairly short and sweet, but of course, if you have questions on it, come back to us at the end and we'll answer them. But what we wanted to get across in this slide was that nope, stay on this slide, please. Thank you. That every data analytics assignment, and if you're going to do this as an organization, you should be thinking in these terms. It really has 3 phases, and they're not necessarily sequential. The best way, if I was going to recreate the slide, I'd probably do this as a kind of a circle or something with these being like a cycle. But you start with understanding, and by understanding, I mean trying to think through a really clear problem or question that data could answer for you. So what I'm meaning is, before you even start thinking about the data, start thinking, come at this as a business or an organizational problem. What is it you're trying to achieve? And that's really important, because it helps you keep the data analytics assignment to a firm scope. It also helps you identify what kind of data you should be looking for to answer that problem, where that data should be, and gives you a sense of kind of what state that data is likely to be in, and what your concerns with it might be. So that's a really important thing to do. And it's really important to do that yourselves. Even if you're going to bring in a third party to do this work for you, make sure you're heavily involved in this particular step. The next step, assessing, is what happens once the data has been extracted. So hopefully by understanding what it is you're trying to do and setting some good parameters, you've managed to go out and you've got the data. Then there's a piece around looking at the data and getting a sort of sense of what's actually possible with it. Quite often there are issues with data. There could be data quality issues. It may be incomplete. It may be held in different areas. We've seen organizations that have been kind of brought together by acquisition where, they've got completely different systems doing the same thing, for example. So you should be able to get some feedback from the stage as to what's actually possible with the data. And then once the data analytics has been performed, which is in many ways is actually almost the easy part, it's then the so what question. So translating that analytics into actionable insights. And that's, again, a piece of work that's too important just to be left to the data scientists. That's something where the organization really has to get involved in terms of thinking through, well, what does this data mean to us? What's interesting here? Where should we follow up? Where can we get some more data to kind of back up our hypothesis? What's the action here? And this, I think Mitch alluded to this in one of his examples. The way we go about this is we quite often have what we call a kind of data discovery workshop, where we sit down once we've got the data, started trying to examine it and put some of the hypotheses we developed to the test around it. We'll sit down with the business, and rather than hand them a report, almost show them some of the things coming from the data, where they're interested, dive a bit more into it, and then maybe go away and find some more data to back up those things. We're kind of really narrowing down on what's really important to them. And I think that's a really important part. Some people would call this visualization. I wouldn't, because visualization is more about how does a report look and feel, and that's really important. But before you get to that, you need to know what's in the report, and that's much more critical. So that's how you access the value of the data. And apologies, Mitch, I know you've prepared some great examples, but let's move on to the next slide.
Yeah, it might be even worth jumping through to the one after that. Could you jump through to the next one after that, please, Kieran?
Yeah.
Brilliant. So I guess our questions earlier on were in terms of strengths and weaknesses as organizations around data. What we use is this data maturity matrix. What it is basically a framework for being able to assess the strengths and weaknesses, or the levels of maturity you might be as an organization around data. So this was developed by the Data Lab, who are an organization that support data, all things data within Scotland. Now, what we find, so if we look on the left-hand side, all of those are the sort of different areas that are important within data. And then across the top, that's the different levels of maturity. We're not expecting ourselves to be competitive, differentiating, leading. That might be for the Googles and the Amazons of the world. It might be that we do none, ad hoc, or foundational. If we feel like we're on top of it, we might be in the competitive space. But what we're looking to try and point out here is that organizations might have different strengths in certain areas. They might have, okay, we've got brilliant data and we've invested a lot in various different licenses of, say, Tableau or whatever it ends up being, but there's not necessarily the culture or the leadership or the support to take the great work that the analytics team are doing and then having any impact in the business. It might just stay in that small space. Or it might be that you've got great leadership and you've got great culture around data, but you haven't necessarily got the right people in place to be able to actually deliver the insights, or you might not necessarily have invested in the technology, or there might be big holes in your data. So what we think would be really helpful, sorry if you just get that one slide, yeah, is if you could spend a little while after this, having a look at this sort of slide or just taking some notes from it and assessing where do you think you are, where do you think your strengths are as an organization, and potentially where do you feel like your weaknesses are, so that you're in a much more mature position, basically. I'll pass back to you, Fraser, for the last slide.
Yeah, I think that was a hint from Kieran. Okay, so what are the barriers? I mean, I guess to grotesquely oversimplify it, you could have like a fitness app on your phone, but that doesn't mean you're going to get fit. And that's, I guess, quite a good a better analogy than the oil one anyway, because at least a fitness app is based on data analytics. But when you can download one, it's very easy to download one, but that's not the same as actually walking the steps or going to the gym. And that's kind of what we're trying to allude to in the last slide is you need to have governance and process and rigor around the use of data analytics to make it effective. So we've tried to cover here, going from left to right, we tried to cover lack of value. So the whole point of this presentation, and this has been a very, very quick run through it, is to try to help you establish what is the value of using data analytics in your own organization. And obviously that's very hard for us to do, talking to you blind like this, but to just try to give you some tools and examples that you could use to get down that journey. But it's really important to establish that value before you start investing in the analytics. The next common blocker is lack of leadership, or the leadership sitting in the wrong place in the organization. This isn't something you want to just give to the IT function to do, or to one function like marketing, for example, to do, unless you only want to use it in that one area. This is something that really needs kind of quite senior executive leadership. And that's why we've designed like the day-long version of this is kind of pitched at board level, because we feel that this is something that needs to be led at kind of from the board down. And then finally, the kind of setting the right foundation. I think the foundation is nothing to do with the application you have, the solutions or the technology you deploy. It's more about that slide that Mitch just took you through, which I'm sure Kieran's going to make available to everyone, which is kind of like, where do you sit in terms of maturity, and how do you move yourself along that before you start diving into your data analytics journey. I'll leave that in just the very last slide. I think it's the last slide anyway. Which is just kind of a very quick summary of our top 3 takeaways. Focus on some actual problems. So try to make them business, business or organizational centric. Be realistic. I've never seen a data analytics project that's delivered 100% of what it's set out to do in the first year. Quite often it takes a few iterations to bed in. So I think it's better to start small, prove the value, and grow from there. And really think through carefully what skills do you need to get started. And I don't think those are necessarily data science skills, because you can acquire them. It's more about kind of what skills do you need as an organization to use the data. And I think that takes us to questions. Hopefully we've still got a little bit of time, Kieran, to do questions. Maybe not the 10 minutes we'd hoped, but hopefully at least 5 that we can do for a few questions. I don't know if any have come through while we've been talking.
We do have time. There's been 1 or 2 points to your first questions, and apologies, it wasn't me giving a hint. Every time I was trying to look at the messenger, it skipped on the slide. So there's one. We had a comment that came through. It said, there's no data because we're a relatively new organisation. I'd question that comment, whether there is no data or whether are you thinking about all the data within an organisation. I think this might lead on to the section with Lorna and with Jude also. So I was thinking actually we might be able to come back and forward, because we have 2 great social enterprises here that are using data. It's a new, they're both newish companies, but all of the questions that you're asking are relevant, I think, to both of the organisation. Someone else said that one of the strengths for them is client data, in terms of the data that they've got. And I guess it's one of those things, isn't it? Depending on the organisation that you have in the social sector. And I know Fraser and Mitch, I know you have been involved with social sector organisations. There's a big focus on impact data and using the impact data to know that you're being effective. But what I found through my career within the third sector is you don't really use operational data so much to make improvements to your service. So it's kind of 2 different things, and they should be aligned in terms of the impact that you're making, but maybe knowing that it's impactful, but yet maybe there's a better way to do things, if that makes sense. So not for innovation and improvement. So are there any more questions on this section? I'll just check the. So what help is available for data analytics that would be affordable for social enterprises? So I guess there's so in terms of data analytics, we might be thinking about, like you were saying before, marketing data. We might be thinking about performance data.
Well, I mean, obviously, if you go to a third party, any third party is going to have a cost associated. So it might be more useful to think about what's out there for free. And Mitch and I made a deal that if I did the last 3 slides, he would answer the first question. So I'm actually just teeing him up to answer this, because Mitch is actually doing an MSc in data science right now. But maybe you're aware of some. He's also developing some training for the ICAW on data. So what's sort of out there for free that people could use to get them started, Mitch?
So it depends on, like, data analytics is free. So you could download R and Python today. There's no cost associated, but there is a cost in terms of the learning associated. And so what I would look to, I don't think cost is necessarily a barrier. I think it's more the investment required in terms of the time and the skills and the effort. And so how I would look at this is more a case of, okay, what sort of business problem are we looking to solve, or what sort of strategy do we want to run down or to go down? And then you can then associate, okay, can I just do this in Excel? Can I use the data analytics tools available in Excel to be able to manage this, or do I then need to get the skills in of someone who knows something like Python, for example? But I think a lot of this is available for free, and all of this doesn't need to be anywhere near as complicated as you make it out to be, or we make it out to be. It could just be producing a lot more charts and visualizations in Excel, analyzing the data that way. And at that point, there's no cost associated with that. You could do that today. I think it's more just having the foundations and the structures in place to be able to get some meaningful insight from your data.
So I think that's a really good point. And actually, it's a really good point. And the organisations I've worked for or run, there's only been a few occasions actually, other than financial data, where I've actually understood what the key value drivers are of the business, and then all of the key kind of data. And it was explained to me as basically what are the three pieces of data that might drive improvements within your business, and then what's all the kind of hygiene, the kind of just cleaning, and what's the stuff behind it that is the kind of nice to have, and it tells you all the kind of softer aspects. Could I maybe suggest that so we've got Lorna Paul from Giraffe Healthcare, and we've got Jude Phillip from Grow Communications. If we could kind of like start off just by speaking to both of these social enterprises about the models. There are quite early stages and different stages. One of them is entirely focused on online, and one of them is use data to pivot the business and actually cope incredibly well. Both have through COVID and realise new business opportunities. So it might, through speaking to both of the organisations, it might provide some real life examples of organisations using data that we can maybe explore on some of the templates we've got. So can I maybe start with Lorna just to start off, if that's great. First question. So Lorna, what's your name? What do you come from? Where do you come from? What's the organisation that you run? I can tell us about what the model was pre-COVID and how it's changed with COVID.
Sure. So, hi everybody, my name's Lorna Paul. I'm one of the co-founders of a social enterprise called Giraffe Healthcare. And we have a digital platform for remote delivery of healthcare services, and our first product really was online physiotherapy. Pre-COVID, we were a relatively new social enterprise, very small, just starting to get our feet under the table, I suppose, and into the market. We are a B2B company, so we sell licenses to the platform to a number of different market segments, to the NHS, but also hospices, private practices, third sector organisations like MS centres and so on. And we had really started working more with those smaller segments, so hospices and third sector organisations, because as you'll probably appreciate, trying to get into the NHS pre-COVID was a significant challenge. So that's kind of where we were, very new, very small, not using any data at all.
Fantastic. And Jude, could you maybe tell us about the organisation also and pre-COVID?
Yeah. So I'm the CEO and co-founder of an organisation called Grow Communication, and we offer support for individuals and families with additional support needs. So that can include things like learning difficulties, autism, ADHD, also kind of emotional well-being as well. And so pre-COVID, we were largely doing face-to-face work with people. We did have some people who travelled from quite far afield, including Egypt, but largely it was kind of pretty much focused in the central belt of Scotland. And we were based on a trading model, so we didn't have any grant funding at all, and the social impact that we were delivering was just purely out of the income that we were able to generate.
Fantastic. Yeah. And I guess just a follow-up part of the question, I'll use the same kind of Lorna first then, Jude. Thinking about COVID, what kind of data did you discover, and what sort of opportunities did you see and grab and go with in terms of the COVID and where you are just now?
So for us in Giraffe Healthcare, I mean, we've been incredibly fortunate because we're a digital health company, and everyone's looking for digital health solutions just now. So we made what some people will think is maybe a strange decision, but we made the decision to offer the platform free to the NHS, third sector and so on, for at least the duration of the COVID initial stages anyway, to make sure that, again, part of our social mission, to make sure that we could support people in terms of their health and well-being. So we offered it free throughout Scotland and the UK. Because we had competitors, and we were relatively new, we just wanted to make sure that we were in the mix. What that allowed us to do, I guess, was to really start to gather some data. And I think there was questions earlier on about data analytics. Our data management is was a bit ad hoc. It's still a little bit ad hoc, and we don't use anything more complicated than Excel. So I think for us starting off with data, and you know, Fraser and Mitch are the experts here, but for us starting off as a small organisation, we gathered very top line data. So how many inquiries did we get a day, a week? How many people did we set up with free trials? How many new patients were added to the platform? And I would keep a running total of that on a day-to-day basis on an Excel spreadsheet. So it was really as straightforward as that. And it does let you look at the trends in the data. I mean, obviously we're a health product, but we have made the decision that, you know, that we're not gathering lots of data on patients, because there's a big issue around privacy of clinical data. So all we gather from the patient side is their email address and their name. So that, you know, we might change that as we go forward. But I suppose it was just really to make the point that that you can dig into data as much as you like, but we started with very, you know, big picture type data and very simple analytics.
Thank you very much. And Jude, so you, as you said before, you were a face-to-face, it was face-to-face delivery. So actually, you really realised new opportunities quickly and grabbed them. And also, I think we've spoken before about some data that you've used and some insights that we've had. You could just kind of talk us through that and what you've learned from it.
Yeah, so we've had quite a big data journey really, which started towards the tail end of last year, so pre-COVID, and we were getting some business mentoring through Big Issue Invest, which is how we first met Kieran. And so we were looking to scale up. We knew we wanted to scale up, but we weren't quite sure. We had some ideas of how, and so the mentoring process from it was some people from Aberdeen Standard Investment really kind of took us into our data, and it completely shifted actually the direction of travel at that point, of the direction that we were going to wanted to scale up in, because we realized that we had some actually false assumptions there about actually thinking, you know, what was going to be good decisions, what was actually the profitable bit. So at that point we started to get really excited about data actually, and started to kind of pull out all sorts of ask ourselves different questions as well, and we find out some really fascinating things. Like when we went through the data, we realized that 25% of the families that come to us have young people who are not in school for whatever reason, and we just hadn't realized that. We knew there was a bit of a trend, but this, like a quarter, that was a huge thing to realize. So we put a business plan together, we put in our application for funding for scaling up, and then it was literally the day after we did the pitch for the funding, COVID hit. I came down with COVID myself, and then suddenly everything was just, well, I mean, it's for everyone, everything was pulled away. I remember sitting down with the spreadsheet, and the sales sheet was just blank for months, and this was before any government support. So, you know, this resonates with so many businesses. You're just looking at blank ahead of you, and it's really been that cycle of going to low points, but very, very quickly realizing that if we were going to sit back and wait for things to get back to normal, we were going to find ourselves waking up in completely and utterly left behind, and not on the right page at all. So with support from Social Investment Scotland, we've had some really good mentoring to think about pivoting, I guess, which is what this webinar is about. So we were able, because we'd got a really good handle on our business, on our sales, on our geographical data, on our socioeconomic data, on our processes, and we'd got quite a lot of snapshots. It meant that when we had to pivot, we knew our business really, really well, and we knew what we needed to be looking at, where some of our vulnerabilities were. And what we have done is we've been able to capitalize on getting some grant funding. So for the first time, we've taken grant funding. We've had some grant funding that will help to kind of stabilize cash flow, but also will enable us to do some really exciting projects. And it's shifted us from being a trading only model to a mixed model. But we were able to get funding applications in within a matter of days, because again, we knew our data, we knew our figures, we understood it, and then we were also able to communicate that to the people that wanted to know, which was the funders. So that's a summary.
That's a summary, and I think it's a really, with both of the models, I'm very excited about both of the models because for different reasons, because they have different operating models themselves. They have a huge potential to trade in this kind of brave new world of post-COVID. And interesting, I think, for both of them, that Lorna and Giraffe made that brave decision to actually actually entering a new market, taking a market opportunity, providing us a product for free, will provide us with data and insights and relationships that we wouldn't normally have. And Lorna, you've had requests from UAE, you've had them, kind of globally, which is fantastic. And similarly with Jude and Grow Communications, your data has shown you about the social impact and the kind of widest reach that you got, which then has been used in funding applications and has got you to a place where it's entirely kind of different. So we've got a little bit more time there. I'd maybe but Mitchell and Fraser, just kind of thinking about what we've just spoken about before. Now, I think I can bring it up again, but thinking about the table you had there about thinking about where do you want to be with your data, and thinking about these two pretty early stage organizations. Most organizations that run well look at their financial data, and you've got a treasurer and you've got someone that's on top of all of that. But the bits that the social sector don't get involved in as much that I've seen is actually thinking about improvement data and thinking about customer data and thinking about all the kind of added value there. So yeah, just to kind of hand over. And Jude, sorry, you look like you want to come in to say something. To say
yeah, well, I suppose there's some other bits, insights that have really come out for us.
Okay.
And like some of it is about has been about not making assumptions about a whole range of things to do with our business, but actually asking questions instead, which I guess comes back to fundamentals of what Mitch and Fraser were talking about. And so we were making some assumptions about our social impact for families, and we guessed that probably if we work with a child, then we're going to be impacting about 5 people around immediate family. But we decided to specifically ask that question of people, and we got a whole range of answers when we asked families who this project work would impact. So some people came back saying it would be 4, which would be mum, dad and sibling. Some people came back with kind of slightly higher numbers, kind of in the 30s, and they were thinking a bit more of wider family. And one person interestingly came back with 190. And initially I sat there, I thought, gosh, what, where on earth is 190 come from? What is that about? And then, so it was just thinking, actually, that person is a teacher. So the 190 for her is all the staff and the students that she works with and the impact. Now, I would never even have thought of that, but because we asked someone the question, then that's given us data which we've had to go back into and look a bit more into. So I think that's been interesting as well, is to challenge assumptions.
Totally agree. And Fraser, just to kind of, I guess, reflections on that, to challenge the assumptions, because actually I think that out of organisations I've seen and I've worked with, typically if you have an impact function, you might, or some sort of data management function, you typically maybe ask many more questions than you actually need or look at. And I think it's just interesting to look at different models to think about, actually, all of the data is really interesting, but what are the key pieces of data for your needs as an organisation, which will either help you for quality improvement and or growth? And I guess just to reflect that in the commercial world, I guess that reflects back on your presentation, Fraser.
Yeah, and I think Jude makes a really interesting point about the kind of conversations or discussions that data can spark, and the way, I think earlier you were saying, Jude, about how how it really helped your understanding of the business really improved. And by knowing your business inside out, you're able to pivot. And I was saying earlier that this is something that needs to be done at a board level. Data analytics is kind of too important just to be done by one bit of the business, because when you start, and we see this in the data discovery workshops we do, when you get different people of different competencies together and they start discussing and kind of pulling apart the data and playing with it, then they start kind of realizing just this kind of insights like Jude mentioned there about, actually this bit of data over here is either completely unexpected, makes us think about our business differently, or the problem slightly different. Mitch gave a few examples where the problem kind of started off with one thing and then became something else as kind of people's insight improved. So I think, analytics is too important to be left to the data scientists. It's something that, it provides an aspect in your organization that really should be available to the board, really should be up at the board level in terms of who's actually analyzing, challenging, questioning the data and having the conversations around. So it's all about, for me, it's all about the conversations it enables about your business and then the planning that can come from that.
I was going to just kind of come in there and say that I've come from an NHS background, and just being a very small cog in a very big wheel, and where data was gathered from you all the time, and there was that sense of frustration and being the very small cog in the very big wheel. You don't actually see how the data relates to anything. And I'd always thought data wasn't for me. I'm not a data scientist. I'm not particularly mathematical. I am quite analytical, and I like figuring out patterns and things. So for me, actually, when I could see how the data related, and I had and I was invested in the data. I'm much more interested in gathering data now because it feels relevant, and I can be a discoverer. I can discover things by doing that as well. And so we're a small organization just now, but what I would be hoping and aspiring is that actually everyone in our organization can feel excited about data, and like they might discover things, and that everyone can bring insights as well.
Really good points. I think Lorna as well would probably kind of reflect on the same sort of points, because as you're from obviously a university background, so and an NHS background, actually both of you should probably empathise with those points that it's about, as a small organisation, I guess, as we've all said, it being relevant at board level. But actually, I found a lot of times that when you maybe use data and you present it back to a funder, per se, you don't get any feedback on that data. You kind of think, what's the point in carrying all of this data? So it's trying to really, I guess, really just like make it relevant, as both Mitchell and Fraser were saying, in terms of those spreadsheets. What is the data telling you in terms of your ability to understand your customers as much as possible, and then look for new business opportunities? That's certainly your case, Lorna, I would think as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think Mitch made the statement. I mean, it's about getting meaningful insights from your data. So it's going back to sort of basics and think, what is it you really want to find out? And as I say, we did very basic things on a day-to-day basis, but we've recently started a couple of what we call evaluations to, now that we're a bit more established, to find out in a bit more detail from our customers, our users, our physiotherapists, sending out questionnaires. We sent 100 questionnaires out last week to try and understand how people are using the platform, what they like. It helps our R&D development, helps with lots of our planning and understanding where people are, what specialties they're working in. As I say, we work quite closely with some hospices in Macmillan and so on. So I think it's that meaningful insight that I think is probably the phrase that struck home for me this afternoon.
Absolutely. And I think it's a meaningful insight, and like you said, it just helps you to understand your customers a little bit more. I kind of question that I would ask for Lorna and for Jude. If you, because I've been in the situation and the point you are in your businesses before, and you kind of think, actually, if I could hire someone within my business, and to your point, Fraser, it's not about just having one person in your business, but someone to actually collect the data and add value at this stage. Say there was a great funder, and I don't have any money, but they had come along and said, I can give you a person for 2 days per week to just do the data work. What do you think your top kind of thoughts would be around about actually for the business and what I know now, or actually what I don't know and I'd quite like to know, how might you make best use of that person's time? And that's I've not asked you that question before, but I just think it's an interesting one, thinking about the early stage of a company. And a trustee who said to me more about, right, in terms of the data, because we were using data to try and make improvements in the social enterprise that I run, there's the known knowns, of which the unknown unknowns and the known unknowns. So it's the kind of things that, what do you know you don't know, and what do you don't know you don't know, and you can't obviously measure that. But it's a really interesting thing to think at any part of a company, to think about, right, what do I know I don't know, and the things you don't know that you don't know you can't work on. So
I almost had a thought in terms of, based on what we've been talking about, almost the wrong thing to do would be to hand over all responsibilities to anything data related to that person because they're the data person.
Right.
That goes against pretty much all the messages we've been trying to say in terms of, okay, we've got a data person, let's give them all responsibilities related to data.
Yeah.
They don't know the organization, they don't know the enterprise, they don't know the vision, they don't know the strategy, and they're just going to look at loads of numbers and maybe come out with something that's useful, or could easily come out with something that isn't. So if I was early stages in the organization, I would let's try and set out that sort of foundation point. Almost going back to that matrix, we're almost looking at, okay, I try to get them to help ask the right questions to set the strategy. Because it sounds like everything we've been talking about has been a case of, okay, we need to make sure that everything aligns to a strategy, that we're doing something strategic with our data rather than just looking at a bunch of numbers and seeing what comes out of it. So I'd look to try and get that person to focus on the strategy first and work with you to sort of set out a sort of data strategy that aligns with your overall organizational strategy. And then once you've got to that point, it almost cascades down the way to then start thinking about, okay, do we have the right people? Do we have the right culture? Do we have the right technology? And then do we have the right data? And so, yeah, my approach, I guess, would be to then get them to sort of go the higher up pieces first, figure out that strategy, where you're going to go, and then that will totally inform, is it a case of we need to do data collection, or is it a case that we've got brilliant data and we need to invest in some technology, or we need to actually do the analysis, we'll get that training in place. So I think, again, it's that strategy piece that then cascades further down.
I think that's a much more succinct way, actually, of the question that I was trying to ask in a kind of roundabout way, but without putting you on the spot. But knowing what you know now, like about the strategy of the organisations, and obviously that's a movable feast.
Yeah. So I was sorry,
Jude.
Lorna.
I was just going to make 2 points. One was, I think for us, there's two parts. So if we had this magical money that Kieran's going to give us for 2 days a week, I think there's data around our patient users and understanding how they use the platform. And it's a physio platform, and we know in the best will in the world people do their programs for a while and then we all fall off the wagon, and understanding that kind of use better and what adaptations we can make to the platform to improve that whole experience for patients. So I think there's one part of analytic work around that, but the other thing is, as Kieran said, is we're getting quite a lot of international opportunities at the moment, and I suppose just to flag up anyone that is trading, and we hope to trade about 90% of our income really. The Scottish Enterprise R&D through SDI have been great at doing a lot of research activity, data gathering to explore markets overseas. So you don't always have to do it yourself. That's a free service through Scottish Enterprise. So just really to flag up if anyone is thinking about, I think, national and international markets, that Scottish Enterprise SDI will do some of that legwork. They actually give you far too much information. You need a data analytics person to go through the information that they give you back, but it's very, very comprehensive. So just a wee shout out to them.
So what I was going to say was going through the data for the first time, it was really, really, really hard. And it just took us days and days and days and to slog through it. And so it was myself and my kind of co-founder, and we did it together. And it's important to find get people to play to their strengths as well. So she was the one that pulled everything off our accounting package, and the business support that the supporters that we got had given us a template spreadsheet, and we populated it. And then so it's identifying which bits do you need to ask someone else in your organization to do for you. But I'm so glad that we sat down and we did it, because it took us on a whole journey. And there were some times where literally we had our head in our hands going, saying, this isn't what we expected. This needs to change things. But actually that's where you do the learning. So yes, I wouldn't be paying someone to do that for me. I'd probably be freeing up some of my time to make sure that I did that, and I think that if you're a small organization, it's really worth investing that time. I think now I could ask someone else within my organization to do that for me, because I get it and I know it. Whereas if I right from the start ask someone else to go and do the data stuff, then I'm not necessarily going to understand it as the lead person myself. So that's probably what I'm thinking.
And I think from Mitchell and Fraser's point of view, those are good answers. I think in terms of really taking control of that data, understanding it, and it makes perfect sense. One thing I found within organisations that aren't early stage, that maybe have been running for years, if it's not at a board level, actually people underneath that level maybe don't like what the data is telling you, because actually it affects people's jobs, it affects what people have been doing for years, and that's certainly been my experience when I've come into an organisation as the data person, and actually just trying to get some support from above me to make some changes happen. It's incredibly difficult unless you do have that board level support. I realise we've run over slightly, my fault on timings, and I completely appreciate all of your time. I found this hugely interesting and helpful. I know from some of the comments coming through, probably people have also. So I want to say thank you very much to Fraser and to Mitchell for your time, and also to Lorna and to Jude for your time today as well. And hope we can maybe follow up at some point with this really interesting discussion.
Thanks, Kieran. It's been a pleasure.
Perfect. Thank you to everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks a lot. Okay. Bye then. Till next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.